What's my favorite movie? I would have immediately said The Godfather, which I thought was a groundbreaking movie in its day, and it still stands the test of time. But I'll be honest with you, the last few weeks I've been watching the old Thin Man movies with William Powell and Myrna Loy, and I'm in love with Myrna Loy. If I go back in time, I might change my choice of a spouse. Favorite band? Classic rock, man. I'm looking at Zeppelin. I've got to consider Pink Floyd. These are very important bands in my life. With kids, who are my hobby, my primary indulgence of time other than work. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you happen to be when you're watching this. My name is Jon Toigo, and unlike some of the other videos on this site, I don't work for DataCore. I don't even pretend to work for DataCore. I don't have the smarts it would take to be part of the DataCore team, I think. But what I am is a 30-year veteran of IT. I run a lot of technology in my own shop, and DataCore factors into that. And also I do a lot of testing and a lot of strategic assistance, direction, recommendations to companies all over the world. I'm the managing principal of a firm called Toigo Partners International, and we specialize in coming up with storage strategies that make sense. A large part of the work I do has to do with quieting some of the marketecture that unfortunately surrounds a lot of storage architecture today. I try to make sense out of the headlines and make sense out of what really works and what are future possibilities in storage, so that my clients and my own company can make intelligent choices about what kind of storage to deploy. And one kind of technology that continuously appears on the horizon that's got a lot of my clients interested, it's got a lot of companies interested right now, is this thing called flash storage. Now, before I get started, I want to clarify a couple things. We have a tendency to group a whole lot of solid state storage technologies together and just call them flash. The fact of the matter is that there are two different kinds of memory out there. There are volatile memories, meaning that if you load them up with data and then you disconnect the power cable from them, they're going to lose everything you loaded into them. And then there are non-volatile memories, which are memories that hold on to what you write into them even when you disconnect the power. Flash is one type of non-volatile memory. One of the volatile memories you may be familiar with is DRAM, or dynamic RAM, which is probably in every server that you own today. Also an inexpensive form of memory, extremely fast, good read and write speeds, rivaling those of flash in many cases, but with that one deficit that you need a battery backup in order to make sure that the data that you write into dynamic RAM remains there. So having said that, I may use the term flash from time to time in this discussion interchangeably with solid state, but really what we're talking about here are solid state memories generally. Now, I want to understand specifically why we're paying so much attention in the industry right now to this flash memory. I want to understand why vendors are, in some cases, encouraging their customers to completely rip and replace their spinning disk, a magnetic storage system that has served us well for about the last 50 years. They want to replace that with all solid state. It may seem a no-brainer to those of you who've already drank the Kool-Aid, if you will, of the flash vendor, but I really want to dwell on that a little bit just so we all understand what we're getting ourselves into. Now, what's making solid state storage so appealing to companies today? First of all, I think there's a heavy dose of the shiny new thing, okay? This phenomenon where this seems to be a new kind of technology and everybody wants to go with what's hip, happening, and new. Chicks will dig you, guys will want to be you if you deploy the latest thing. However, when you get down to it and you talk to companies about it, what they're really intrigued by is the performance advantage that supposedly accrues to flash memory. Think of it this way. With a solid state device, you're doing about 200 to 500 megabytes per second in terms of the speed at which you read data from the device. You get a little bit less than that, about 100 to 300, 400 megabytes per second in write speeds. And that's on first write. We'll get to that in a little while. But when you look at that and you compare it to a disk drive does about 180 megabytes per second in read and about 60 megabytes per second in write. So we're talking about many orders of magnitude improvement if you go to a solid state device. At least that's what it looks like at the device level. We're thinking, boy, are we going to bump up the speeds of our applications? Everything's going to run a lot faster. Now, the second key thing to understand about flash memory in particular is that it consumes a lot less electricity than a standard rotating disk does, and many orders of magnitude less. So when you're consuming less electricity, you're also passing less of that power off in the form of heat off the top of the device, which means that you have lower heating, ventilation, and air conditioning costs as well. And a lot of folks who are into the green phenomenon, but also a lot of folks who are just concerned about the amount of electricity or the cost of the bill, with the cost of electricity increasing at a rate of about 21.2% every year, according to an article I recently read in USA Today. They're concerned about what energy costs, and they're trying to cut costs, and this seems like it might contribute to that effort. However, we also have to take a look at the potential drawbacks of flash technology. One of these, obviously, is going to be inconsistent performance. And I don't mean by that you have no way of knowing from one write to the next what the performance is going to be. Actually, we have a very simple logarithm here, if you will, and that is that the first time you write to flash, it's going to deliver the ultimate performance, what it's ultimately capable of, its fastest write speed, its fastest read speed. The problem is when you write to it a second time, you have to first erase the data that's in the cells that were previously written, and then you have to overwrite it with the new data. So suddenly one step, write, becomes two steps, erase, then write. And that's going to slow the performance of the device down by half. Now, the industry's tried to answer this with development of a lot of different workarounds that are collectively referred to as trim technology. Trim technology is basically coming up with creative ways to substitute other cell groups of cells that you're writing to, for cells that are already populated, and writing your new data or your updated data into these fresh cell groups, and then as a background task, erasing cell groups that are now no longer necessary and are already populated. That is certainly an effective way to deal with the problem, but it doesn't resolve the problem. It basically works around it. Now, also limiting performance are things like the speed of interconnects. You know, the wire that connects up to that device that's full of flash, if you're doing an external flash array or something. Wire speeds are not necessarily the same as the speeds of the bus of the server. Now, when you deploy a flash card in a server, you're taking advantage of the server bus, and most flash cards these days utilize the PCI-e bus architecture, and as the speeds improve there, they are increasing the performance of the flash components that are loaded directly on the server. But there are other models for deploying flash that don't have them have the form factor be a card inserted in a server. We'll talk about that in a minute. Essentially, flash is probably going to give you its best performance when it's sitting right on a server bus. It's going to give you a different kind of performance, maybe not as good if it is in other form factors and other deployment options. Now, the durability of flash has also been a challenge. What do I mean by durability? Basically, flash is not a forever device. You write data a certain number of times to a cell, and if you overwrite the number of times that flash can handle, which in multi-layer cell technology is about 250,000 times, you will burn that cell out. And when a cell burns out, an entire group of cells has to be taken off the line, because that's just how flash works. So essentially what you're looking at is a fixed life, 250,000 writes, and then you kill a cell group. That is what's known as memory wear. And the industry's response to it, again, hasn't been so much to fix the problem as to develop a workaround to it, what they call wear leveling technology. Wear leveling technology is they sell you a flash device, they say that it has 1 terabyte of capacity on it. In fact, it has 5, 10, 15 terabytes of capacity on it, but they don't advertise the additional amount for you to use. What they do is, as a cell group burns out, they replace it with another cell group. that happens to be on the same device. You don't know that that's happening. It seems like your flash is very durable, that it's going to last you in certain workload environments, like when you buy a flash device and you install it in a laptop, it's probably going to last just as long as a disk drive would, for 4 or 5 years. However, depending on your workload, you could have a serious problem with memory wear. I was recently talking to a large financial services company, and they said they had just been visited by a flash vendor who tried to sell them flash cards that cost $40,000 a pop. And they asked them about memory wear, and they said, well, it's MLC, so it's going to be 250,000 writes per cell location. And this IT manager advised them that, look, we're a credit card company. We do over 1 million credit card swipes per second. Now, if you think about that and the transactional data that would be written to a flash device, you'd wear the device out in about 30 hours. So every 30 hours, they'd have to pull the card and replace it with another card at another $40,000. To their way of thinking, that was not a good fit for this technology for what their application required. And you really have to understand what your application requirements are to understand how wear is going to hurt you. Now, there are better forms of non-volatile RAM in the works. In fact, I was just reading a report. It's partially confidential, but apparently within the next year, we're going to see a couple of new RAM technologies come to the fore that have the characteristics of flash, except they're a little faster on reads and write speeds, and they don't wear out. Now, if that comes to fruition, that could be a real game changer. Right now, you got to work around the problems that exist in the technology that we have. So I guess the ultimate question is, are these limitations going to hold up the adoption of flash? You know, the vendors and their analysts and their pundits are certainly suggesting that flash prospects are high and to the right, that everybody's going to be running a data center. In fact, there are different opinions at DataCore. I've talked to some engineers who think that flash is right around the corner and the all-silicon data center is coming. And there are others who think that flash will never really germinate into much more than a momentary fascination. Now, certainly acquisition cost is going to be a factor. You think about it right now, current generation flash is about 40 to 70% factor greater than the cost per gigabyte for a disk drive. So, you know, do the math. It's going to be a fairly expensive proposition to simply rip and replace your current infrastructure and put in an equal quantity of flash capacity. Now, that might not be the right way to think about the cost of flash. Some people prefer a cost of ownership analysis. They say that, you know, when you consider the savings in electricity, think of it this way. It's like the new fluorescent light bulbs to replace the incandescent ones. They cost $20, but they're supposed to last 12 years. And they generate less heat and they consume less electricity, so you got a lower power bill, and they're paying for themselves within the first year or whatever. This is the statement they make about the light bulbs. So from a total cost of ownership perspective, if flash is going to satisfy your requirements, it's going to consume less electricity, it's going to bump up your performance, chances are you could view that as a better economical fit for your environment than going out and buying an equal number of disk drives. Now, when you go above the level of the individual flash device, the flash drive or a flash card, you run into other factors that may influence the adoption and the cost of the technology. For one thing, we've seen in disk that disk drives and the cost per gigabyte of a disk drive falls by about half every 18 months. That's been going on since the 80s, and recently it's kind of stabilized, but it was almost like clockwork. About every 18 months, we double capacity. About every 12 months, we would cut the price in half per gigabyte. The problem was none of those cost savings at the drive level were ever passed along to the consumer. We stuck a bunch of drives into a crate, which comes from one of 3 manufacturers in Taiwan, and then we stick a bezel plate for your favorite manufacturer's logo on the front, and then we would sell it at a huge markup. You know, anybody who remembers the deduplication craze a couple of years ago remembers that there was an array that came to market that would do deduplication on the array. It consisted of 300 1 terabyte SATA hard drives that you could buy on Newegg for $79 a piece. That amounted to, let's say, $3,000 worth of disk drives. However, the manufacturer added this specialty software to the array controller this deduplication software, and they managed to come up with a manufacturer suggested retail price of $410,000 for a $3,000 box. So, do the math. If it turns out that Flash gets componentized and develops a very good cost per gigabyte, but that isn't passed on to the consumer because additional wraparound costs are put into it when it becomes productized as an array, you may see a slowdown that accrues to the high cost of the finished good as well. And by the way, I've never seen a good comparison of disk versus solid state at the array level. I've only seen it at the individual drive level. So at the end of the day, ultimately, your choice may be guided by how much work gets done. Now, Flash, deployed appropriately, can actually help accelerate certain applications. And if those applications, the numbers of things accomplished, the work that's accomplished by the application amounts to income for your company, it may very well be the case that speeding up the ability to create more workload and to process more workload may justify the cost of the technology if it drives cost to the bottom line and profit up. Now, that's assuming that your applications are designed to take advantage of Flash. And the unfortunate truth is that most applications aren't. They weren't designed with Flash in mind because they predate Flash altogether. And there are a lot of use cases, in fact, that are being suggested by vendors that I think obfuscate this very cold reality. In fact, they're making a lot of claims about what Flash can do that may not really be justified by your actual experience. So buyer beware. And then finally, I would say that there are a glut of providers in the market that are selling Flash devices. This is kind of a two-edged sword. I mean, on the one hand, advocates of Flash say, well, that just generates a lot of competition. And you know what competition does? It drives down the cost of the product to the consumer. Well, that's true. Cutthroat pricing may actually deliver you a Flash component that is very inexpensive. However, companies cannot sustain cutthroat pricing for a protracted period of time. It's not in their best interest. I'm talking about the vendor. Vendors will go out of business in the current market. In fact, we've already seen that happen with a couple. And what they're basically leaving you with is a lot of gear that they have sold you, but there's no company left there to support it anymore. Now, some folks are saying, well, that's not really relevant because the best of breed companies are being bought by the three-letter big shots that have always been in the storage market, and that gives you a little comfort factor that the company you buy the product from this year will still be around next year. That might be true, but still there's the potential there for a lot of unsupported gear. Now, when you think about how Flash is used, maybe a better approach would be to say, instead of replacing all my infrastructure, why don't I purchase Flash and deploy it in a manner that's complementary to my existing infrastructure? That way, I'm sort of insulating myself against the possibility that Flash technology won't be the final word, and I keep my older stuff that's reliable in play a little bit longer. Flash currently comes in three distinct forms. One, I've already mentioned, was PCI-e cards that deploy inside the server chassis. Another are form factor of a hard disk, but all made of Flash chips, what's known as a Flash SSD or solid-state disk. And these are increasingly used to create hybrid arrays that combine some Flash components with some disk components to get better performance out of the cobble that results. And then finally, there's the third form factor, which is the all-Flash array, which is like buying a tier 1 disk array today, except all the components in it are solid-state disk. Of these three form factors for Flash, I would have to say that the one that has delivered the greatest value thus far in the case studies that I'm familiar with are the hybrid arrays. Let's put it in context. A couple years ago, the land speed record for disk was set at the Storage Performance Council, which measures these sorts of things, sort of like NASCAR, how fast can the disk array go around the track to the right, okay? It's not really a valid measure of how it will perform in the business world, but it's a way that we use to generate some performance metrics on gear. And a disk manufacturer, HP, with its 3-par rig, set the new record. They did 410,000 IOPS off of a 3-par rig. That was extraordinary. It was mind-bending, very, very fast. Of course, the way they did it was by using 1,900 disk drives in parallel, with each disk drive consuming between 7 and 21 watts of electricity and generating a whole lot of heat. So this was a huge electricity sink in the middle of your data center if you put this in there. I don't know, 3 months later, a little company called XIO, which creates a hybrid rig, they put 256 disk drives plus 100 SSDs, flash form factor as disk drives. And they ran the same test. They got 600,000 IOPS, and they were consuming a fraction of the electricity that the 3PAR would produce. So if you were looking for an extremely high-speed repository for your data, a true Tier 1, Tier 0 repository, that XIO rig was probably the right answer for you, and it certainly wasn't going to cost as much or entail as much electrical cost or total cost of ownership as the extremely fast disk rig. So that gives you an idea of how a hybrid array offers you a complementary package of flash plus disk. And there are also other deployment options, as I've mentioned. The question sometimes that's asked of me is, are any of them superior? Well, the fit for any technology really has to do with the applications that it supports. That's why I'm kind of not comfortable with the whole notion of software-defined infrastructure or software-defined storage. As nearly as I can tell, you develop the application software that is for your business, and then you simply select the right infrastructure components underneath it in order to make it deliver the value that you're looking for. So in my world, at least, everything is software defined. It's not a function of which hypervisor you're using or that sort of thing. But anyway, the bottom line is, if you got too many vendors and they have a lot of competing products, you run into the issue of which vendor can I trust? And a lot of people turn to the vendors for a little guidance, and they say, okay, look, I've got this kind of application. What can you do for me? Unfortunately, some of the use cases that are coming out are Monty Python-esque. I don't know if you were a fan, as I was, of the old British sitcom, but Monty Python had an episode once where they had a game show called Stake Your Claim, and this guy gets on the show and he says, so-and-so, who's our participant today, he claims to have written all of Shakespeare's plays. And the man says, yes, and my wife wrote all of Shakespeare's sonnets. And he says, well, these were known to have been performed 600 years ago. And he says, well, that's where my argument falls apart, doesn't it? And everybody laughs, and we're out of the sketch. Unfortunately, if you're committing to buy a technology and it turns out the use case that's presented to you to justify the acquisition is, bull. Pardon the French, but that's actually the technical term for it. You're not being very well served by that acquisition. Now, just because flash is faster than disk doesn't mean that it's going to process your workload any faster. Okay, I hear this constantly. We're going to deploy flash because our virtual machines in VMware are running too slow. Oftentimes, flash will not assist in speeding up your virtual machines at all. Unless you have what's known as I/O queues, meaning that reads and writes are waiting in line to be written down to the disk, flash really isn't going to help. Flash is basically a device for queuing up data, so that I can write it later on, or so I can read from that temporary queue that's been written. If that's not the problem, flash, you can deploy all the flash you want. It's kind of irrelevant to the solution. Okay, so basically there's a lot of hype around flash out there and a lot of infighting between the different deployment options, and that in and of itself is also inhibiting adoption. It's not exactly instilling confidence in me or a lot of people who think about the storage that they're buying and don't just buy the shiny new thing. There's also the risk of vendor failure, the risk of early product obsolescence, the questionable interoperability of different products, a lot of different factors that are going to go into a strategic decision about whether I'm going to use flash in my infrastructure. Now, are there any surefire contributions that flash can make? I would say yes. And here's the one. I quote Fred Moore, who is a twin son from a different mother. He's a consultant over at Horizon Information Strategy, and he's done definitive work on what's known as tiering, tiered storage. And basically, Fred says that in a well-disciplined environment, you're going to have about 1 to 3% of your data stored on some sort of a memory-based component, what he would call tier 0 storage. And that's data that needs to be accessed very frequently, has a very low tolerance for latency. This is transactional data. It can be really mission critical, business critical data. And you're going to spend between $50 and $100 per gigabyte at tier 0 to host that data. Then typically you'll have another 20% of your data stored to tier 1 storage, which is a fast disk, the 15K and above disk drives that you can buy from Seagate or Western Digital, and an array that's comprised of those kinds of drives, or maybe even a hybrid storage solution. And then tier 2, which is bigger, fatter disks, more capacity, but slower speed. These are the big SATA drives, enterprise SATA. The price point there is about $2 a gigabyte, and that's perfect for data that you need to have online, but you don't need to access it nearly as frequently, and it doesn't change very much. And then finally, tier 4, which is tape. Okay, now a lot of people said tape was dead. Tape continues. In fact, it's enjoying a renaissance right now. 40 to 60% of your data, which never changes and is never accessed, belongs on tape. Okay, now if you did this, the 1 to 3%, and then the 20%, and then the 20%, and then the amount that you're putting to tape, 40%, let's say, you would end up with an environment of 100 terabytes that wouldn't cost any more than, say, $400,000. That's back of envelope calculations. Okay, if you do it the way most companies do it today, which is just using tier 1 and tier 2 disk, then you're looking at about $750,000 for a 100 terabyte solution. That's the big difference. And Flash actually it helps you economize by taking your most mission critical data and storing it in a fast access mode. Now, anyway, the bottom line is I can do a lot of these things, the tiering things. I don't have to go out and buy specific disk arrays and specific flash arrays or flash cards. I can do this very simply and affordably using DataCore Sans Symphony V. Because Sans Symphony V allows me to pool storage resources and group together the slower, lower performing disk with a lot of capacity, the faster, higher performing disk with less capacity but a little more performance, and of course the flash that's been installed, whether it's server side or it's in a hybrid array or it's in an all flash array. I can create a pool out of that, and I can basically write scripts or policies that drive my data automatically from one pool to another pool, regardless of what gear I've installed. The Sans Symphony V thing also insulates me from early equipment obsolescence, from a failure of a particular vendor, because if his gear lives up to very specific standards, I'm going to be able to leverage that gear for as long as it has useful life. Now, I consider that to be probably the most important thing you can consider if you're going to be considering Flash at all. You should consider virtualizing your storage infrastructure and leveraging this tiered pooling that is enabled by DataCore Sans Symphony V. Now, the other thing that SSV is able to do for you is it offers a service called write coalescence. If you're going to leverage Flash and you're aware of the wear that can limit the life expectancy of Flash, write coalescence, which is a feature of Sans Symphony V, will allow you to economize on the numbers of times that you write data into the Flash. Because remember, everything that you're writing in a Sans Symphony V environment goes into DRAM first, which is commodity RAM that lives on your server. And it's going to stay there sort of as a level 1 cache. And if you have Flash there, you can treat that as level 2. You can consolidate a whole lot of little writes and then periodically dump those writes into the Flash component. That is going to reduce the number of writes and hence the rate at which the memory wears out. So it's going to buy you more life out of this expensive component. I would not deploy Flash without it. Okay, it's just as simple as that. So the conclusion. I'm clearly not a Flash advocate. I'm not, a Flash monkey, basically. If it succeeds, good. If it doesn't succeed, I really don't care. What I do care about is making sure that my applications get what they need. And frankly, I think that the whole decision about Flash begins with an analysis of your application and maybe a proof of concept test to ensure that the application can leverage the capabilities that Flash is bringing to the party. Now, last thing I would mention, again, I'd reiterate this, is that you'd be a fool to deploy Flash technology in its current state without first virtualizing your storage environment. That's the only thing that ensures that you're going to get the value for the money that you're spending.